Hi folks, this is Danielle from Sibylslab of Cartomantics coming at you with a list of 5 decks that are all a part of a similar genre or the same genre. So I wanted to take a look at 5 photographic decks and consider how they work. Like the literary nerd in me, the literature professor, loves to talk and think about how genre works, what it is, and how it functions, why we like it. And genre applies to all forms of media and art, and photography and tarot decks is its own form of genre. So, you know, I have notes over here if you see me looking to the side to keep myself on task. And I'm going to begin with those notes. Tarot started as a painted art form, as we know. Those of us who understand the medieval history of tarot knows that some dudes in medieval Italy, probably dudes, maybe lots of people, painted decks that were originally used as playing cards and for games. Now, over hundreds of years, we've come to see a lot more decks that are, aside from painted, other forms of animation and graphic design, and lots of collage decks in recent years. We've seen lots and lots of collage. But a novel form of art for tarot is photography and photographic tableau that are focused on realism and inconspicuous editing. So, this is what I mean. Of course, especially with collage, there are lots of real people or real things, images that get worked into the tarot archetypes as we know them. But there are fewer decks that are meant to have a single scene that is staged and representative of a single card and taken that way. Right, so the Four of Wands that is staged, taken as a photograph, and meant to be offered to us as a largely unedited representative Four of Wands. So I thought it would be interesting to look at some decks that claim to do a version of that, creating photographic tableau, collecting those images, and suggesting that they work together as a tarot deck. And think about a few things, how the metaphorical landscape of tarot functions with an emphasis on photography and realism. It's also interesting to think about how these creators are often positioning this genre and medium as especially important or useful or unique in the categories of tarot decks. So the suggestion that photography and appreciating and engaging with tarot symbols through realistically staged photographs does a particular kind of magic with the way that we engage with and read tarot. So that's a little interesting. I like that claim, and let's test that out. I love to lay out my purposes, so I have 3 purposes today. First one, share 5 lesser known or lesser discussed tarot decks, all of which follow the RWS tradition and are realistic photo staged tableau. Consider number 2, consider how the competing choices, these are 5 very different decks. So although they all fit under the umbrella of photography, there are very different choices being made here about the cultural context of this staging, who we're casting as models, whether we're explicitly or playfully evoking the medieval texture of tarot and its European origins, how all of those things taken together inform our reception of a given deck. So in other words, how does the artist's different approaches craft the boundaries and possibilities of the genre of photographic tarot? And finally, discuss whether photography and tarot can actually do something unique for our tarot practice. Is there something especially magical about this genre that is special and worth including in our collections for a reason beyond I like that art, but it does something special? So we're going to start with the first, what is claimed to be the first photographic tarot deck. This is the Mountain Dream Tarot by B. Nettles, and I'll start flipping through as I share this information. This is the oldest of the decks that I'm sharing. The others are going to be shared in no particular order. But this deck was created by artist B. Nettles and is described as the first entirely photography-based tarot deck. It's actually really famous for that. Its originals are in the Museum of Modern Art, in the Yale Archives, in the San Francisco Art Museum, and was published in 1975. So this is an oldie. This is really important to the history of contemporary American tarot and is understood to be such by appreciators of modern art who otherwise don't care very much about esoteric tarot. My particular version, this is the back by the way, is a commemorative reprint of the 1975 original deck. I just found out, I look up all these links so I can include them in the video description. As of August of this year, 2025, this deck is no longer in print. So that's unfortunate, and I'm sorry to share that. But the history of this deck. So as I said, published in 1975, this was dreamed up, literally, she says, inspired by a dream that she had in the year 1970. She was at an artist residency in North Carolina and had a dream of a tarot deck that was entirely comprised of photography, and she went on her journey of making this tarot deck. The models are all people in her personal orbit, so family and friends, as well as other artists from that residency. A neat fact about this deck, the Three of Swords, this has a long afterlife. The Three of Swords was used in the year 2007 by Bruce Springsteen as the cover of his album Magic. So we're talking 1975 to 2007. There are still people knowing this art and caring about it enough outside of the tarot community to include it as album art. So pay attention to that Three of Swords when we get to it. The first thing to think about here is the place of this genre in tarot history, the genre of photography and tarot, and how that's a sort of novel media form. Tarot is, whether or not you use it esoterically, so even if you just understand it as an interesting set of images to be used for games, they were still painted, the majors, as sort of conceptually representative of transcendent archetypes and concepts. Judgment, the final judgment, that's a big one. The blasted tower, or La Maison Dieu, the house of God. The empress of humankind in a transcendent archetypal way. So the idea that a contemporary artist can find settings and cast figures in a way that captures the magic and scope of such important archetypes is a little audacious. B. Nettles, this is an important moment in art history because it is such an audacious idea. The idea that a collection of medieval images that have evolved over time can be represented and adequately mediated through the figures of friends and family and the tree down the road and all of it. As for my thoughts about this deck, this is a valuable artifact. I got this deck because I love tarot, and I love tarot as not only a tool for practice, things I shuffle and use to do readings for myself and others, but because I love the art history of it and the evolution of it and the way that we consume it and understand it. This, as I said, I think is a sort of crucial moment in the evolution of the way that we understand the possibilities for tarot. So in that way, it makes sense that I have it and find it useful to share and fun to take out and look at sometimes. However, Bee Nettles did not, I think, imagine me, who, with my story, my background, my own context, sitting in this house in North Carolina all these years later, and how this assortment of images and its photographic context, the way that casting does or doesn't reflect, and design choices, her costuming, the way that it did or didn't date itself. She wasn't thinking about that, and she shouldn't have been. Art changes over time. She had an idea and she ran with it. And I think based on what she shared and what we understand about the history of the deck, she executed exactly what she wanted to, which is perfection, right? What she wanted to execute and what she did effectively isn't a tool that I find so accessible as a medium for readings for myself, right? So this is not a collection of images that I feel a particular affinity for. And I don't have to. But that does mean that it is more an art object and a historical object in my collection than it is a tool for reading. I would say, though, as I got this out and was looking through it, I put it in order because I had shuffled it a little bit so that I could share it with you. It did make me want to give it a shot. It made me want to give this deck a fair shot for some readings. And I thought, let's read for other people with this deck. I think that there could be something interesting about that because it may speak to others through me. It may be easier to map the archetypes onto other people's experiences if I take my own ego out of it, if that makes sense. Okay, the next deck, very different, much more modern. This deck is called the Child Inside Tarot. This is the back of it. It is by artist, photographer Alice Smeets. And let me share a little bit about it as I talk about it and share my thoughts in general on this genre. This artist, Alice Smeets, is better known for her deck, The Tarot of Bohemian Secrets. It was formerly named the Ghetto Tarot, and understandably received some attention, some negative attention for that name. But if you've heard of that deck or the Tarot of Bohemian Secrets, which is itself a photographic deck, entirely set in and comprised of models from Haiti, then you know the photographer who made this deck. This is her second, I think her only other tarot deck. The models in this deck are from a specific indigenous community in Guatemala. So all of these children are from this single indigenous community in Guatemala. And with the participation of that community, she was able to cast and design and photograph this deck. She does say, I should mention, that there's profit sharing. So if you purchase this deck and it is still in print, then a portion of the profits goes to the community that she collaborated with to make it. Now, the title of the deck says it all, right? This is not quite a mystery what this deck is meant to do. And even if the title wasn't The Child Inside, the casting kind of gets it. Look at this sun, you guys. This is so sweet. I joke all the time everywhere that I eat children. I don't really eat children. I used to teach very young children before I taught college, but I don't have any children, which I think makes a lot of people, us determinedly childless people, women, sometimes scare people, which is, I think, why I started joking about this. But I actually find this deck and the children, the faces, the expressiveness, the choices around costuming and setting so moving. It makes me love the children and not want to eat them like the hag witch that I pretend to be. This deck is meant, look, the Princess of Waves for the Page of Cups. Oh, this is meant to inspire the child in us and access that inner child in the spirit of emotion and play. There are lots of decks made for inner child work, and it's called the Inner Child Tarot. So this is one of the ones that can be used for that. My very unprofessional and unsophisticated account of what inner child work is engaging with our own stories, our own evolved selves, and the origin stories, the childhood wounds, and strengths and curiosities and developments that contributed to the story of who we've become. That was like a bunch of mess. Suffice it to say that there is something called inner child work that smart and, psychologically educated people can inform us about. And this deck is in part made for that work, the serious work of reparenting the inner child and, meeting him or her and encountering them and all of that. But it's also just made for play. It's just made for sweetness. It's made for fun. Amelia, my co-Sibyl on here, loves decks that access play, and inner child decks, quote unquote, like decks that would otherwise be understood as like using imagery that is meant to touch that inner child. But she just loves using them for her general readings. And I love that. It's not something I generally do. It's something that I would try with this deck, though. The idea of like using this deck and getting this card for a question about contemporary, like, my pain at a thing that happened yesterday, getting this card in that reading, that's a little dissonant to me. That is in part why I rarely use like decks that feel youthful. But I want to try it. Amelia's inspired me, and this is a deck that would give me that encouragement because I think it's so delightful and sweet. As for the genre beyond this deck, what about the medium of photography and its particular support or not for inner child work or that kind of self-story origin growth work? I do think there is something about photography that lends itself and leaves a particular special kind of room for this kind of work. And here's why. A lot of inner child decks that I've seen that situate themselves as especially for inner child work are highly illustrated, tap into fairy tale and folklore archetypes, which I love. But suggest that the stories and images of childhood are the doorways in to that kind of work, that those are really helpful and primary doorways into doing that kind of work. However, photography can help us access the young part of ourselves that was anemic to play or had a limited imagination. Like some of what a lot of us are doing, if we do something called inner child work, are accessing the wounds of a child who is in some way stunted or limited, um, or oppressed and restricted. That inner child does not always have access to the imaginative landscapes that we find in some of these other decks. Photography, even happy-go-lucky photography like this, asks less of us for that suspension of disbelief and can feel like it gives permission. Did I share the back of the decks? That's the back of the cards. Can feel like it gives permission for entering the archetypes and using them for discovery, inner child discovery, even if we don't align with the specifics of folktale. I mean, here's the thing. If we're using a collection of images for folklore and fairy tale work that taps into the inner child, we're not all coming from the same archive. Like lots of us are coming from different backgrounds. My father is West Indian, right? Like those folklore, those stories are not the same stories as that are coming from other cultures or some of the, Euro-Western stories that I know otherwise. So we're all coming from different places, yet we all can understand the basics of like a young child laying down and understanding leaves growing. That's the beautiful thing about tarot and transcendent archetypes that are decontextualized in general, right? That's the kind of nice thing about tarot, that it's lifted from the specificity of time and place. And photography plays with that a little bit, and can challenge us in that it tethers those transcendent archetypes to time and place. But in this case, this tethers the archetypes to a real embodied child experience and lifts it out of the specificity of images and metaphor and fairy tale that may be alien to us for whatever reason, and or might be themselves wounding or unfit pathways, unhelpful doorways. So that is the Inner Child Tarot. It's a really special deck, and I don't know that I've ever seen it shared on YouTube. So that's interesting, and I'm glad that I got a chance to share it. It may have been shared PS, share in the comments if there are other folks who've done interesting walkthroughs, but it hasn't been shared a lot at a minimum, and it's a special one. It's a sweet one. Okay, this next deck is called the Lost Tarot by Hans-Jürgen Bauer. This is the back of the deck. It's a really long deck. Here is the Mountain Dream Tarot is a traditional tarot-sized card. So that gives you a sense of what we're talking about. This is a big guy, and I have small, medium hands, so this is a tough one. And that size limits my work with the deck. So let me share a little bit about this deck as I flip through. It is so beautiful. It is so beautiful. I'll start with that. Okay. This deck was published under the conceit of being a newly found, it's still in print, by the way, the link will be in the description. But the lore of this deck is that this was a rediscovered collection of images that are real medieval photographs and were taken by some kind of proto camera created by Leonardo da Vinci. So, in other words, like someone found hidden in the archives, in a chest underground, whatever, some collection of images that Da Vinci himself, an apparatus he created, was used to take these photographs and create a tarot deck. Like bananas, and I love it. It's so great. And is that Fortitude Strength card not phenomenal? It is so powerful. I find this to be so powerful. The archetype of the maiden and wolf, that kind of dynamic, is an important one for me in my work with myth. So I really like that card. I find that card powerful. In any case, in reality, Da Vinci built some really cool stuff. He also designed lots of stuff that he imagined but did not have the capacity to build. None of those things was a camera, as far as I know. And certainly none of them resulted in the 78 images that make up a tarot deck. But I love to pretend that such a thing happened. Now, the lore is that a former wool merchant named William Bradford worked with the citizens of Nottingham and collaborated with them to stage these tarot scenes, so that he intentionally wanted to create a tarot deck. He knew the technology, this is a beautiful star card, the technology available to him from Leonardo da Vinci's apparatus, and that in partnership with the people of Nottingham, he was able to stage these images. Wild. Okay. Now, there is an entertaining dissonance here between the use of photography, like that realistic medium, like the medium that's sort of more realistic than oil paint, than other kinds of mediums, right? This is like actual action and images taken of that action, rather than being captured by the hand and eye otherwise, then edited later. But so the medium of photography here in general, right? Like the medium of photography in Mountain Dream invites us to consider how real place and people and costume and setting, like all of this stuff we can touch, can in fact be stylized into transcendent archetype. That is an interesting artistic claim and spiritual claim, kind of. This deck takes that same medium and rests this whole kind of lore on the instrumentalization of this medium. Okay, so like, in other words, the primary goal of this deck, its framing purpose, is to engage with that structural lore. It feels like the creator didn't want to just create a tarot deck. He wanted to create an object-based story. So it wasn't, I need a story for my tarot deck, but I love the idea of this story, and I love the idea of creating an object, that this tool that functions in the fullness of that lore. And on top of that, I'm going to use the genre of photography, the genre that is, in theory, most dispassionately realistic, and I'm going to use it to advance the reality and drama of my imagination. So, you know, I'm going to suggest that I have a different story about the medium itself and let that alternative history inform your engagement with these images. That is playful and unique and fun. That is like, I think that provides an example of a way to test the boundaries of this genre beyond what I've seen in other decks. So, other decks, to different degrees, have taken photographs and manipulated them and edited them lightly. The ones that I'm sharing have like had a lighter hand in the editing process. But there is a degree of commitment to the concreteness of the archetypes. There's a kind of promise embedded in the genre that part of what's beautiful about using a photography-based deck is that it insists that the archetypes live among us. They exist in our orbit in some way, or they can. This deck is not interested in that, in my opinion. It does that in some ways, right? This is suggesting that it's on planet Earth, the same planet that we live on. It's suggesting that these are real flesh and blood people who walked the earth and who signed on to an artistic project, right? Like, so there isn't the suggestion that these are like captured images, like unstaged photographs. There is the idea that the people of Nottingham were like, that sounds great. Let's make a tarot deck. Let's do this. How do we make this happen? How do we model for you and find the right locations? So, in that commitment to a lore that is grounded in a real world as we understand it, there is that implicit promise that the genre itself makes. However, the more important thing about this deck, I think, and about this creator and his project, is what the deck insists about the place of story and deck narrative in how we engage with tarot. So, as I said, I don't think that the background of this deck, Da Vinci's, apparatus and William Bradford's, project of creating a tarot deck, I don't think all of that is meant to be just a laugh, although it is delightfully funny. It's charming and all the stuff. But I think that framing is actually essential to how we're supposed to understand and engage with this Ten of Swords, right? Like, we are to understand that in the medieval world, when tarot was being imagined and played as a game, that a technology we didn't even know existed resulted in the creation of this set of archetypal images. And it was so precious and secret and interesting that it was buried and only unearthed hundreds of years later. That is fascinating and enriches what I understand, for example, to be the stakes of a Four of Coins. Like, the stakes of this image, the fact that it has such a vibrant origin story, that this is a real medieval man who was posed and the subject of an artistic medium of a real medieval technology, and he understood and we understand what this tableau itself is supposed to tell us about resources and materials and 4 coins, whatever, that is a heightened set of stakes, and it brings a kind of seriousness to the fun. So for that reason, I think this deck adds something really unique and powerful to the genre of photography-based tarot decks. I don't know of another photography-based tarot deck that instrumentalizes the genre, or the medium rather, the medium of photography so much. So that is The Lost Tarot by Jans Hergenbauer. And, that deck was a majors only deck a long time ago. Then he developed it into a full 78 cards. It was offered on Kickstarter, and that's where I backed it. It's a really special and fun deck. I wish it was a little bit smaller, but those images are a lot of fun. All right, the next deck is the Somnia Tarot by Nicholas Bruno. Here's the back of the cards. These are the newly published second edition cards. So matte cardstock, gilded edges. This is the newest edition. I have the first edition, and I like that edition, but I didn't love the cardstock. And I'm glad to have backed this. He's a really special creator. So let me share a little bit about this deck. Nicholas Bruno, the creator, shares in his story and information about the creation of this deck that he has been a lifelong sufferer of sleep paralysis. I will embarrass myself by describing sleep paralysis for people who don't know and prove that I actually kind of don't know. But in short, sleep paralysis, as I understand it, is a condition that means a person can be conscious and unable to otherwise move. So, paralysis, not move. And be sort of captured, imprisoned in your body by sleep in some ways. And that sufferers of sleep paralysis, from what I understand, sometimes or even often hallucinate. Can hallucinate scary things. And their quality of sleep is really bad, as we might imagine. So, Nicholas Bruno explains how he is a lifelong sufferer of sleep paralysis, and that he has been sort of haunted by spectral figures his entire life, and that it is these spectral figures that he has captured in this deck. So these are all characters that aren't just spooky. These are brought to life and photographed images of figures that have haunted him through years of sleep paralysis. With that in mind, the deck becomes a tool for traveling dream landscapes. I mean, look at this fool, right? This fool is a body in a bed being tipped out of bed, out of a window, as if sleep is a portal to a dream landscape. So this deck is a sort of doorway to the dream landscapes that he's documenting through these staged images. And it's also, as described by him, a tool for doing shadow work. A lot of people are deeply disturbed by these images. And they are haunting. It makes sense that they would easily fit within the rubric of discomforting images that evoke our shadows, anxieties, pains, wounds, worries, all the stuff. They make us really uncomfortable. Um, they're meant to. Sleep paralysis, as Nicholas Bruno and others have described it, is a horrifying experience. Can you imagine being trapped in your body, awake but unable to move, and seeing a figure like this? Hold on, let's see. A figure like this standing over your body. That is terrifying. Now, I like to be scared, and I love the landscape of this deck. I am really moved by the absorbing nature of what he has created. And I also love the degree to which Nicholas Bruno has shared the creation process for this deck. If I'm not wrong, I think he's like in Long Island or something. In any case, wherever he is, we see the lighting here. He has to drag himself up out of bed at just the right hour, at just the right time, that suits just the right kind of image that he's trying to take. He builds every single thing that's used in these cards. He solicits friends and family, people in his personal orbit, to model for the images, and this is him. He is sort of embedded throughout the deck. He has a few videos on his YouTube channel, like he built this. He also built this. I'm pretty sure the building of this is shown on his YouTube channel. But a few videos that show the process of building these items, and where he talks in real time about the process and purpose of creating this. There's such an intimacy to the world he creates. There's such generosity in his explanation for where this world comes from and how it reflects his own vulnerabilities. There's also a kind of suffocating energy about it. There is an anxiety that pervades this dream landscape. This is not a collection of images that paint a dream portrait that I want to spend years and years in. Like, this is not a vacation dream space. This is gritty dream space. I've had different conversations over time about what mediumship is. I promise this isn't just totally a non sequitur, but what mediumship is, like mediumship being mediating communication between ourselves or somebody in our world with a question, and acting as medium to communicating with people on the other side. So, such as a deceased loved one. Whether mediumship exists as a thing or it's a grift, whether you have to have a special gift for mediumship, like are some people, is it like psychic power, or is it like tarot, a learned tool and skill and practice? Most people I know who are otherwise pretty generous about the notion of practice and tarot, a kind of like, if you are committed to engaging and are curious, tarot doesn't require a special skill or gift. Those same people tend to be resistant to the idea that mediumship is the same or can be similar, and that tarot can be a tool for mediumship if you don't have the gift, whatever that means. I don't agree, but like not polemically. Like I struggle to identify precisely what I mean or what people mean by mediumship. And what I can tell you is if you ask me a question, I'm really good at reading cards to get an answer. And if I believe that divination accesses something bigger than the immediate here and now, then maybe, right? Maybe a question that accesses something outside of us that answers that question, maybe it can connect to and be mediated through the cards and through me as the reader to contact or connect with that other source of answer, whether or not it's a person who is deceased. Now, that aside, assuming that we think mediumship is possible, and that it's possible with tarot, regardless of who we think should or shouldn't be doing it or whether or not it works, I can say that the times I've kind of reached for practiced readings that intersect with a notion of mediumship, this has been the deck that I've used. This deck is perfect for that kind of work because, in my opinion, it is grounded in the world that I know and that was walked by the mediated voice, right? Like if I am asking a question of a figure, specter, spirit that was once embodied on this earth, this is the world they walked on too. And yet, this is a spectral space. This is like the world inverted. It feels like the world in shadow, and it feels like the place where almost people go, a kind of uneasy in between. This feels like a liminal reality, and it feels like a set of images that exists in the liminal space where communication could or would happen, if it happens at all. That's all a long way of saying that if mediumship is something that is interesting or you're curious about, or someone is curious about, this set of images kind of makes sense. That is, the aesthetic makes sense or could make sense for some people. Okay, we have one more deck, people. You're getting tired of hearing me talk, but I hope the images are so pretty. They are enticing. The final deck is the Ebony Tarot. I'd say that this is probably the newest deck. The Ebony Tarot is by Lisa Sévigné, and I'll share a little bit about it as I flip through. Here's the back. This is a delightful matte linen. Ugh, so beautiful. The edging is this lovely blush pink. It's very new to me, and I really like it. I really like it. So here is information about the deck. The artist, Lisa Sévigné, is from Montreal, and the deck is staged in natural settings of the region, and all of the models are, according to the photographer, the artist, Afro-descended artists. So in other words, these are all people who are Afro-descendant in ethnicity and are fellow artists. The guidebook, the cards themselves, all of it, the box, is bilingual, French and English, which reflects the region itself, a bilingual region. I find the deck, I think this card is so beautiful. This is one of the cards that made me get this. My birthday was last week, and this was my gift to myself. And this card is one of the reasons it was my gift to myself. Now, the artist frames this deck as a melanated RWS alternative that is great for beginners, among other things. So, if you like or want to learn tarot in the Rider-Waite-Smith framework, but you don't like that art, or you like this art better, right? You like that, but this is more to your taste. And or if you like the idea of a deck comprised of Afro-descended people, so people with brown skin, um, in the African diaspora, this is a deck that's good for you. All true things, right? These are images that are pretty loyal to the Rider-Waite-Smith tradition, and they are also images that are comprised of models who are Afro-descended, brown-skinned folks. And if that's what you're looking for, this does that and does it beautifully, right? All on lovely cardstock. But I would say that this deck, there's a little bit of nudity, folks. It's not gratuitous in my opinion, but do know there's a little bit of nudity. It is overly modest to suggest that the power of this deck is confined to being a good RWS alternative that's melanated. I think this deck is far more than that. In other words, if you can have a melanated Rider-Waite-Smith deck of another kind, and still this deck does something different, in my opinion, beyond its utility to beginners or its use as a good alternative to that art. As you see, there's a kind of delicious suspension of time here, a timelessness to these images. So whereas the Lost Tarot got lost between the medieval ages and here, and now here it's found again, but all the images are from medieval times, this deck has costuming and settings that are dislocated from an insistent present. I'm not seeing like my apartment building here, right? I live in a house, but like when I lived in Chicago, I'm not seeing any high rises here. I'm not seeing any cars. There is a resistance to idiosyncrasies of the present. And yet, the choices here around clothing and other style and design choices, hairstyles in some cases, other expressions of gender, and flexibility and power and all of that stuff, that is certainly not of a medieval tradition and framework. We see those appearances here, right? So the ambiguity of setting, of time and place. Like this dress could be like from United Colors of Benetton, or like made by, a seamstress in like the 17th century. I don't know. There is a real refusal to commit to an era, and I love that. That's beautiful, right? There's something so powerful about the flexibility of these images. Also, the Child Inside Tarot, like let's talk about models for a minute and casting. The Child Inside Tarot was also a mono-ethnic deck. Those were all indigenous Guatemalan children. And it has a very particular story of its creation, that it was created in collaboration with this very specific group. And it also is created for a very specific purpose, for engaging our child selves. This deck is meant to be tarot in all its incarnated tools. So it is representative enough, broad enough that it can conceivably do anything that tarot can do, generally speaking, right? Like divination work, meditation work. Of course, you can do that with the child inside, but that's not really why it was made, right? This, like the creator says, is an alternative for the RWS beginner, right? Like this deck can do what tarot can do. And so the choice to, and it was filmed, photographed in a place where the artist had to make very deliberate efforts to find a broad swath of Afro-descended models, right? Montreal is not teeming, from what I know, with Black artists who are looking to model for tarot decks. This took a concerted effort beyond what a tarot creation experience would be if we were in a confined Indigenous group making something in collaboration. This creator had to make an affirmative and intentional effort to cast from a broad cross-section of people in a region and find folks who fit her intention, her representative goals, what she wanted to do in keeping this deck melanated. And that is interesting to me. I used to be a union organizer 100 years ago, and I remember talking to a community of low-income folks who were workers trying to make a living wage and not making a living wage, and talking to them about the concept of bread and roses. So getting tired of hearing activists talk to them, these folks sort of expressing that they were tired of activists insisting on a limiting account of the importance of economic justice to the exclusion of the importance of beauty also. So like these are people who want bread and roses too. They want beauty and justice, economic justice too. I sometimes notice that tarot decks that are created with an aesthetic politics deeply committed to justice and representational justice, making sure that there is parity in the stories we see told in the pictures, that sometimes it feels as if there is, I want to be careful in how I say this, less room for roses. That is not to say that there is anything missing. You know, I think the primary judgment of a deck, in my opinion, is what was the creator's goal and did they accomplish that goal? Like, not did they accomplish my preferred goal, right? So, lots of these decks are accomplishing exactly what they want to accomplish, and that's perfect. That's beautiful. That is the fullness of that journey. I think that the goal of this creator was constructed in a way that balanced her desire to create a melanated deck with all of the stylistic and aesthetic and esoteric concerns of crafting a tarot deck, that those were of equal importance and balance in her photographic approach. I love how she executed that. And that is a goal and an aesthetic politics that resonated with me and resonates with me. Um, I feel present in these images. Um, like I have my bread and roses too. That's why I told that little anecdote. That was such a powerful moment for, like, you know, 20-year-old me who knew how to fight the good fight, and someone explaining to me, like, hey, you idiot. Who cares so much about justice? We care about justice too, but justice includes beauty and art. Like, the stuff that makes life gorgeous, um, that has to coexist. This recalls my stupid, smugly, politically, advanced 20-year-old self. Maybe I'm just reflecting on that because it was just my birthday. I'm older than 20 people. um, but this deck, I'm so glad to experience this deck. I think it's really special and gorgeous, and unlike other melanated decks I have or have seen, um, you know, it is not necessary, and it's grown less important to me over time, frankly, that I, quote, see myself in the cards. It used to not bother me as being offensive, but it used to feel my absence if there weren't people who could possibly represent the literal me anywhere in a deck. I care about that less. Now it just bothers me less. Um, for whatever reason. Maybe I'm tired of looking at myself in the mirror, so I could do without seeing myself. But I think I'm more comfortable with the notion of archetype and more indifferent to the presence or absence of my specificity, my identified specificity. And I think some of that actually probably came along with my increased work with pip decks, and my sometimes preference for pip decks. So yeah, so that all goes to say, I think there's one point at which it would have felt really affirming and important to me to have that deck in hand, the Ebony Tarot, just to feel seen. And there are other people who I'm sure share this sentiment that I used to feel so keenly. That made me a little tender sometimes. Maybe some of that was connected to wounds that I hadn't fully engaged. So while I don't need it to satisfy that need, like I don't feel the pain of erasure if I'm not necessarily visible in a tarot deck, it's still nice to see myself textured all over a deck, and not just superficially, right? There are lots of decks with folks with brown skin of all shapes and sizes and ages, right? This particular deck and the kinds of clothes these folks are wearing, and their gender presentations, and their modernity or sort of like amorphous, opaque timelessness, all of that, I feel so aligned with some of my ideal self. So, like, that's the land I wish I lived in and looked like. And some literal, right? Like, I could wear lots of those clothes happily, and some of those clothes I would wear and people wouldn't feel like they were that different than the clothes I wear otherwise. So they probably look more expensive than the clothes I wear. So in any case, those are all of the decks, folks. That is the Mountain Dream Tarot, the Child Inside Tarot, the Lost Tarot, the Somnia Tarot, and the Ebony Tarot. I hope that this exploration of the genre of photographic tarot decks has provided some different ideas or questions, some depth, fostered some like thinking about genre as it exists within your own collections, and how realism is or isn't important to you, how medium, photography or otherwise, can function as a part of practice in art, how art history is or isn't represented in your collections and how you want it to be. I'm shuffling without saying our question for the collective. So on this channel, we like to ask a question for the collective at the end. I always draw 2 cards because the magic happens between 2 cards. Got a jumper. But our question today is going to be, what do we need to get real about this week? What do we need to get real about this week? And I'm going to keep my jumper. She is our Queen of Cups. And pull one more card. The 10 of Swords. So that is and this is Mountain Dream Tarot, in case you don't remember. The Queen of Cups and the 10 of Swords. You know, sometimes the Queen of Cups can represent a lot of different things. And I joke with people that, among the court of tarot, she would be the tarot reader. And among the court of tarot, the Queen of Swords would be like the evil witch. But sometimes the cup suit is actual imbibing, partying, luxuriating, intoxicating, right? Socializing. And I'm reading this, in this case, this Queen of Cups, as maybe intoxicating herself, not necessarily with alcohol, but there are lots of ways that we intoxicate ourselves out of reality. For example, I know some people binge Netflix, never me, but some people do. But whatever it is, I think there's a way that we have been intoxicating ourselves as a way of turning our back on and ignoring a painful ending. And I think this week we need to get real about that. I think we need to consider how we are deadening our clarity and engagement with reality through food, through relationships and intimacy, through alcohol, through whatever it is that we're doing, to stop doing that, to reflect for a moment on what's ending and what's hurting and why we might be intoxicating ourselves a little bit as a means of avoiding that. So that is the invitation. We love an invitation to end with. This has been so fun, guys. This is such a great experience to understand my collection as a function of genre, understanding our tarot libraries in that way, and thinking about how the architecture of tarot works within these different genres, and how looking at these different versions of RWS photographic tarot speak to each other when presented next to each other. So I hope that has also served you and been interesting to you. Until next time, guys, I will see you in the lab. Bye.